All right, welcome everyone to Knowledge at Noon. I am Jenna Harris, the Education Manager for YoloArts. Just a reminder, please go ahead and mute your microphone and your video so that we can ensure a smooth streaming experience for everyone. Before we get started today, I do have a few housekeeping announcements I would like to review. First, Suite at Gallery 625 with Polly Laporte and Robert Gonzowski is extended through November 30th. And that show is up at Gallery 625 in the County Admin Office on Court Street in Woodland. The Barn Gallery and Gibson House at the Gibson House and Property are open every Thursday from 2:30 to 5. So we hope to see you stop by the property sometime. And our big exciting thing going on around here is ArtFarm. It's happening this Saturday, October 16th from 3 to 6 p.m. Unfortunately, our shovel tickets for the event are sold out, but general admission tickets are still available for $40, and those do include food and wine for one person. At the event, we will have delicious bites from Las Brasas, Good Hummus Produce, Full Belly Farms, El Rey Chili Company, Nugget Market, and Capay Valley Lavender. We'll also have beverages provided by Blue Note Brewing Company, Bogle Vineyards, Capay Valley Vineyards, Elevation 10, Herringer Estates Family Vineyards, Matchbook Wine Co., and Sika Hills. And returning this year is DJ Shar Ramos. If anyone was here for the virtual event last year, Shar did a fantastic job, and I am ready to boogie down with her live and in person this weekend. And most importantly, our silent auction is live. The silent auction show was juried by today's speaker, Natalie Nelson. You do not need to attend the event to bid on silent auction pieces. So you can check it out on our website, or to learn any more information about ArtFarm, visit YoloArts.org. Today's event will be a discussion with Natalie Nelson, and then at the end, I will host a moderated Q&A. To submit a question, please click the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, or if you're joining us by phone, please click more and then chat. During the presentation, I will monitor your questions and compile them to discuss with our speaker at the end. Next, I'd like to introduce my partner in crime for today's event, the curator of the Barn Gallery and ArtFarm Art and Ag Program curator extraordinaire, Janice Purnell.
Thank you, Jenna. And I can't wait to see you boogie down this Saturday. Looking forward to that. Anyway, yeah, thank you so much. I just want to reiterate what Jenna said. We're so excited about our exhibit right now. Today and tomorrow will be the last time you'll be able to see all the work, 128 pieces all together by 93 artists. We're just super pleased to have this show in one spot in our Barn Gallery for the first time this year. So please make a point to come and see it in person. And if not, of course, it is available online. And yeah, really, that's all I really want to say is to thank the artists for all of their contributions and our sponsors, and Natalie for taking the time to really come down and see the show and jury a beautiful selection of work, 35 pieces of art, and just your perspective and your sensitivity as you selected these pieces that really give a well-rounded sense of place. And I can't wait to hear your talk right now. And just thanks for all you do for the arts community in Yolo and at the Pence Gallery. And it's just been an honor to work with you. So thanks, and hope to see you this weekend too.
Definitely.
Thank you, Janice. So now to introduce our wonderful speaker and friend of the organization, as Janice has mentioned, Natalie Nelson. She is the director and curator of the Pence Gallery, a nonprofit arts organization in Davis that centers on exhibiting the work of Northern California artists. Since 2005, she has developed the organization to expand its exhibit and education programs to reach new audiences throughout the Sacramento region. She curates an active calendar of 12 to 15 individual and group shows each year. Education in the arts is central to her work. Every exhibit is complemented by artist talks, demonstrations, and workshops that help connect the public with artists and their creative work. She has an MA in art history from USC and has worked for over 20 years in museums and nonprofit art galleries. She's also an exhibiting artist and educator who has taught classes for many years at the Crocker and other organizations. She lives in Davis with her 2 daughters and her husband. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you so much. I loved the introduction, and I just wanted to thank Jenna and Janice for working with me on this project. It's been a lot of fun. So I am going to share my screen to start my presentation. And I decided to call my presentation, let's see, The Meaning of Place, because I thought, you know, so much of the ArtFarm exhibit that I juried was about place. What does it mean to live in Yolo County? And what is our agricultural community about? And for me, it was really about this sense of geography that we have, the physical landmarks that we see. So this is a photograph that I took actually a couple years ago from Sutter Hospital, looking out towards the mountains. And I feel really fortunate to live in Yolo County. And so it just seemed like a great fit to be the juror for this show. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the ArtFarm exhibit artworks that I chose, and also to talk a little bit about the meaning of place in my own artwork. I've been an exhibiting artist for maybe 3 years now, and I've been doing my own work for about 7. And I thought it might be interesting, because people have asked me, to share a little bit about that process, what it's like to be an artist versus an art historian or a curator, and then to kind of wrap it up with any sort of questions you might have about either one, the ArtFarm or about my own work. So I did want to share that I do have a bit of background in agricultural farm life. Both of my parents were born and raised on family farms. My mom was raised in northeastern Kansas. That is her on the right photo, probably about 8 years old, I'd say, with her parents and her brother. My family farm on that side is still functioning. My cousin runs it, and they grow different sorts of, they grow soybeans and corn. On the left is my dad's farm. So my dad also grew up on a small family farm that's still running today. It's run by his brother. And this was a newspaper article from 1953, I think, that was, you know, family farm, or farm family gets ready for the holidays. And so it shows him and his siblings basically doing things he had to do, whether it was collect the eggs or, you know, feed the horses. His mom is making pies and things like that. So both of my parents had to be very self-sufficient from an early age. My mom was cooking and cleaning and sewing about 12 years old. And so one thing I really like about kind of what they shared with me of farm life is the ability to do anything you want as long as you work hard at it, and to not be afraid to get messy. A lot of what I love to do in my own artwork is to really get my hands, you know, messy and really involved with whatever art process I'm doing. And I think also one thing I wanted to share was, although my parents didn't stay on the farm as young adults, they left, we would go back and visit my cousins, and everyone was always talking about what was going on in the fields, you know, whether or not there was enough sun, rain, how quickly the corn was growing. So I kind of grew up thinking, oh my God, can't they talk about anything else? But that focus on nature, of course, is so important when your livelihood really depends on what you're growing. So here's my mom sewing on the left. Both my parents were very hands-on. My mom was an amazing cook and sewed these beautiful dresses. And my dad is still doing carpentry, as he's doing here in the photo on the right. He made me a table for my art studio. And even though he's retired from being a pilot, he still does volunteer work in the community that he lives in for people who can't afford things, like he makes ramps and helps them fix their house for free. Okay, to get back to the ArtFarm and the Art Harvest exhibits at the Barn Gallery, I really love this program, the Art Nag program. And I think Janice mentioned that it's been going for over 14 years. And I was lucky enough to jury from 75 works of art. I selected 35 So I'll talk a little bit about the juring process. And then the art harvest exhibit is huge. It's over 100 works of art are submitted. So of course I want to emphasize again, go to the gala. I'll be there 3 to 5, get your tickets now. I did not know there was dancing. So that does change some things for me in terms of footwear. But anyways, to get back to the art and ag program, one thing that it's really been celebrated for is making places. And what I mean by that is how can contemporary artists come together with a group of people they may not normally see or hang out with, which is ag people who live on farms and do ranching and things like that. And how can they together kind of define this place that's unique in terms of history and culture and geography? One thing agriculture is about is, of course, place. It's all about, how is that seed growing? What is the microclimate of that region? What are the microbes in the soil? Things like that. So again, if you have a farm, you're very involved in place. So a couple of the themes that came out when I was looking at the artwork were definitely kind of rural life and agriculture. That was part of what we were looking for. And it was definitely the people and places and activities that you find in rural agricultural Yolo County. And I live in Davis, and probably a couple of the people who are watching probably live in some of the bigger towns in Yolo County. But we all know that rural county lines are right there. So our connection to that agricultural side of Yolo County is much closer than I think in some larger cities. We see all those things going on, and they're part of our daily life. So another thing that I love seeing in Yolo County is just the natural vistas that when you wake up and you drive west or east, you see the mountains, the plants, the animals that really characterize our region. One of the most important things I think is, of course, water in this area, and Puda Creek is so important, as well as Lake Berryessa, which I think is slightly outside of Yolo County. But all those things kind of define who we are and where we live. One interesting part was, with farm life, of course, it's also about the man-made views of things like barns, homes, green silos, things like that. So we're going to see quite a bit of that. And not as many views of the workers who work the fields, but there were a couple that were really interesting. So when I was judging the artwork, I was looking for, it sounds a little corny to say, but when an artwork speaks to you, you kind of know, and it's beyond just, I like it, I think it's pretty. A lot of times it'll bother you in a way in which you kind of come back to, I need to look at this again. There's something going on here that I need to appreciate over. And I'll find myself going back and really looking again. And I think if you can slow people down, that has got to mean your art is doing something. In art appreciation classes, a lot of times they'll tell you, go beyond your preference, because so much of understanding art is more than just whether or not you like it. And I think that is really important. I used to help train the docents at the Crocker, and it was hard to get them to get away from that. But the older I get, the more I realize I'm really enthusiastic about art. So you'll hear me say, I love, I like, and some of that just comes from either knowing the artists or just really enjoying their work. But again, a lot of these were chosen not necessarily because I would have them in my home, but because I have a great appreciation for what the artist is trying to show us. One thing I thought was so interesting in several of the pieces was point of view. So an artist, whenever they're trying to depict a 3D landscape on a 2D surface, they have to decide, where am I going to be as the artist, and where am I going to put kind of the viewer? And it could be you're standing right in front of a tree. It could be that you're looking at a tree from afar, and it could be that you're looking at a tree from a bird's eye view. So artists had a different way of showing all these different views that I thought was really interesting. So we'll look at some of those. A really complicated way is when you have multiple points of view, you might be looking at a tree straight on, but then in another part of the composition, you might be looking at it from up above. One thing several pieces showed was kind of a microscopic point of view, almost as if you were like an ant looking at something really, really close. And I thought those were really interesting. Sometimes artists can make us think outside of our normal kind of very literal brain and make us see the world in a different way. So here's one of those wonderful perspectives. On the left is Patrick Cosgrove's Almond Orchard in Bloom. And you'll see that it's kind of up above the perspective, like as the viewer or the artist were kind of floating up high. You can see that the landscape kind of bubbles out towards us, and the almond orchard is ringed by this road. And then on the left is kind of an irrigation ditch. So he's really trying to focus your attention on this almond orchard. And of course, we see those all the time. They're beautiful. They have these pink blossoms, but kind of almost ringing it with that road and doing that fisheye perspective really hones us in on that. And then he's used the mountains in the background to really kind of cap our vision down over those trees. On the right, Marie Therese Brown's Kettle Ranch Drive. I'm gonna try my little pointer. I just learned how to do this pointer. I thought it was pretty cool. Ooh. This is one that shows kind of a classic linear perspective where kind of your eye is going back towards this vanishing point. So on the Cattle Ranch Trail, you can see that your eye kind of goes back here. So she creates this deep sense of recessing space using not a lot of things. We have a little fence that leads your eye here and a couple different parts of the landscape that kind of lead down here towards the background. Artists always choose what kind of style they're going to paint in. Jaime Montiel's painting style, I think, is really beautiful in that he uses these really wide brush strokes. He's really not focused as much on the crop itself. Like, I think this is lavender, but we don't see any actual blossoms. But the color of those fields, that purple and lavender, is just beautiful, the way the light kind of rakes across that field. You can see half of his composition is really the land, and then half of it is sky. So he's really keeping us down to kind of look at that land and what's going on there. And I love just kind of painting, we call it very painterly approach, where your brush strokes are very thick and it looks very, it looks easily done, not that it is. On the right, David Casellas Fordson. I had to look up what that referred to. Of course, it's a type of tractor. It was built by Ford from 1917 to 1920, just FYI. And you can see that the detail in that tractor is amazing. So he's heightening, probably with some sort of Photoshop, the details on that tractor and really making it very tactile and really red. Down below where you see the green grass, again, he's making it kind of hyper green. In the background, it looks like the sun is setting. You've got this pink and yellow light, you know, again, exaggerating kind of in a painterly way, if you can say that about photography, the way the sky looks to create a particular emotion. Several of the paintings and photographs are very surreal, and I tend to like surrealist points of view because they show us something different. Dee Conway's photograph, Delicate Dance, is two different photographs, and what she's done is you see kind of this bush here that centers right here, and this is kind of the center of the whole composition. So you're looking down at this bush, but then you're looking across at this field of sunflowers. The light in the back, I thought, kind of reminded me a little bit of the fires, how you get that kind of brilliant orange light. Again, she's trying to slow you down, make you look. We see a lot of sunflowers. It's one of those things that, you know, we kind of make fun of almost, but they're so beautiful. And if you can show it in a different way, I think that's really interesting. Yvonne Roach's Birth of a Seed. I didn't realize this one was kind of her first attempts at resin. She doesn't normally do resin, which is this liquid that you pour and has color embedded in it. So it's very shiny. It's somewhat hard to control. So you kind of see this is supposed to be the birth of a seed, maybe here. And as it's going up and kind of growing into a little plant. So again, a different perspective, maybe from the perspective of the seed itself. So I thought that was really interesting. other artists like Rachel Klein show us more of a more distant view, a little bit idealized of a farm. It's very quiet. It's called Farm at Sunset. That's the piece on the left. And, if you took out this barn right here, this farm structure, which looks very contemporary, this could be like a 19th century farm view. It reminds me kind of American regionalist painters like Thomas Hart Benton, who showed this kind of pastoral life that at that point was really disappearing. But another thing I wanted to point out is artists who can do that kind of technique that is so detailed that it's photorealist are amazing to me. And Rachel's definitely one of them. And Marie-Therese Kobashigawa's Red Barn is another painting that I think is very photorealist in its kind of cropping and the way it shows the barn in great detail. One thing I love about Marie-Therese's point of view is your eye just definitely goes back to this dark square, and you're wondering, what is that truck there? It looks kind of antique. And, barns are something we see all the time, but they're so characteristic of a farm. So there's a lot of mystery in this one, I think, for me, even though it's a very simple composition, but somehow she's created this sense of, you want to know what's inside that barn. Patterns and geometry. I see a lot of patterns in these work that I think are interesting. Anyone who's ever flown into Sacramento Airport knows that when you look down, you see all these circles made by irrigation. You see all these pathways from the tractors or the property lines. And so patterns and geometry are something that is very natural to see in art that's made about farms. On the left is Lucille van Omering's Haystack from Hungry Hollow Ranch. And this one, great perspective. Again, your eye goes back towards the mountains, but it's really the detail that captures my attention here. You can see almost every little piece of hay there. And, we see so many of these fields, but I think it's so beautiful when the hay is all kind of manufactured and just sits there. And you see several of the barrels in the back. Karen Fess-Ecker's farm track art is interesting because it shows geometry and pattern. I think it's funny how she called it farm track art. So it's basically like the tractors are making the art. So you see these little pathways, maybe that had water in them, or maybe they're just little pathways. And she loves to use color. And in this one, she's used from kind of this darker red orange up to yellow, to light green, to blue. So it's kind of a rainbow of color. And her brush work is really interesting, big kind of wide brush strokes. It looks easy. It's very painterly, but I'm pretty sure it's not. Subject matter and meaning were another thing I was looking for in the farm art work. What were they choosing to show? This was olive wood that was magnified from Oliver Farms. So, if you're looking at an olive tree, we've all seen those. How can an artist show them in a different way that might lead you to think about the wood itself in a different way? And this one by Gerrit van Omering, Olive Wood Magnified, it just really makes me think about trees and growth. And, I look at those rings right here with this heightened color, and I just think, wow, is that a year? Were these some years where we didn't have any rain? So again, it asks more questions than it answers. And the way Gerrit did it, it almost looks like they're cut pieces of wood on a scanner, and the little negative spaces, the black, they're also kind of interesting. They knit all that wood together. So that's another thing, is what are you trying to say about this place? Are you trying to talk about different sorts of larger issues is something that I always think about. And sometimes artists talk about larger issues through contrasts. David Nassiter's Storm Over Orchard is a lovely black and white view of some sort of orchard. And obviously you can see from the sky that we've got these rain clouds rolling in. And because it's black and white, there's just really strong contrast. And then, right in the foreground, there's this little piece of machinery that's left there. There's no vehicle to pull it away. There's no one here, and it just kind of leads your eye out this way. So it's almost like a little bit of a lonely point of view. And again, I'm interpreting a lot into that, but I think the way he's cropped it and his use of black and white really gives you that sense of kind of just that it's more than just a landscape. Laura Sullivan's From the Ashes is a charcoal drawing on top of a USGS map. So if you think about place as being represented by a two-dimensional map, Laura has it all in this one piece where you can see kind of waterways, and here's Sacramento. So it's literally about our county, but it's also about the people who work there. This person's hands, look like somebody who works, out in the fields. They have dirt under their fingernails. They look really kind of rough, but they're handling this little plant so gently. And the title of this one is From the Ashes. So I think, automatically that leads to bigger significance to me because, we've had so many fires, and just even the threat of fire, sends people into this dark space. But this one is very hopeful. I think it's, again, part of our community always comes forward and kind of rebuilds. And then some artists I chose just because they showed a beautiful detail of a particular farm. D. Rosenberg's Shining in the Sun. It just shows a couple of these flowers, the red against the blue sky. And there's just a little patch of green here, beautifully painted. Sometimes farm life is just about, the one tomato you capture or the one blossom. So I love how they can do that. And it stands in for so much more than that. Dale Green's Fong Farm pipes. This might be something even the farmer wouldn't appreciate. It's a bunch of old pipes, maybe from irrigation, I don't know. Spider webs all over them. And then this larger pipe. So it's details, it's part of the man-made environment. And again, it's capturing something you wouldn't normally focus on in an interesting way. David Satterley's Signs and Silos, I think, really talks to me about our relationship to nature. So much of agriculture is about kind of man's trying to control nature to grow things. And here we see some silos, we see this building over here, and it's the juncture of County Road 26 to Road 89. And one thing that makes me always think about history when I look at this one is black and white photography always makes me think of the past, like Ansel Adams or even older photography. And here we have just this county road, and the county roads really knit our county together. And you see all the mailboxes and stop signs. And even though some people might say, it's not pretty in a traditional sense, I think there's a lot going on here that is really interesting to me. And I love that he chose to do the road sign in color. Kent Smith's Trees, I think, is interesting because of that backlit tree. He's choosing to really highlight this one tree, and he's somewhat close to the tree. If you want to talk about point of view, and the trees behind it are kind of framing it. So the importance of trees, obviously, on our farms, and the people who've chosen to keep these trees and kind of maintain them. Trees to me are always about heritage and kind of habitat for other creatures. Okay, and another slide about man's relationship to the land. Vanessa Stafford's Silos could have been done, I think, in the 1940s because she's got this great palette, which is kind of like the WPA people, where they were trying to kind of stylize the buildings. There's no people seen. You just see there's something growing here. It looks like it could be some sort of green. But again, it's about kind of man's world here. Of course, we all know about the honeybees. Honey Harvest by Ellie Gould is one of the only ones that showed people working. So you have these people working with the honey hives, taking them out. They're in some sort of orchard. It looks like they're harvesting the honey. And we all know the importance of the bees and how they've been under threat. So it seems only natural to me that we should have a piece about the importance of the bees. So I wanted to shift a little bit because I've been talking to everyone kind of as an art historian, or I've been categorizing things and grouping things, and in some ways being very left brain. As an artist, you have to function in your other side a lot, and that is the part that's kind of dreaming and imagining and putting things together in a creative way. And that is the part of me, I think, that I've been trying to develop over the past 7 years. And I wanted to share a little bit about the way I look at place in my own artwork, as well as kind of some of the questions that I ask myself now. So when you're going out to look at someone's artwork, you're always trying to figure out why an artist made something. It might be that it has, a deeper resonance to them in terms of maybe it's political art. It might be something that relates to something spiritual. It might be that they're looking at the elements of art. They're fascinated by circles or certain things that they see in their own work. But when you're, an artist, I think you ask a very different question. And now I find myself going out to artist studios, and I don't even want to ask why they create anymore, because I realize it's very subjective, and I think a lot of times we're not even sure why we're making things, but I want to know how they made it. So once you start getting into the process, what kind of brushes do you use, all that technical stuff about paint choice and things like that. I love that stuff now. And I just wanted to talk a bit about some of the sources that I was using. Of course, the artworks in ArtFarm are looking at Yolo County. A lot of what I look at in my own artwork is kind of where I grew up, which was really two places. On the right is the blowhole from the island of Oahu. I grew up from when I was 10 to 18 on the island of Oahu. And then the center photo is the beach in rural Washington on this island called Whidbey Island. And so some of that being in nature, I think, being a kid that grew up pre-internet, pre-cell phone, has really kind of filtered into my own work. On the left I included this because it's one of the largest pieces I've made so far. It was out of redwood that had fallen from a tree at my house. And I decided to lash it together. And the piece is all about kind of heritage and how we connect ourselves to each other, different generations. And once I looked at this like little driftwood house over here, and we see these every year when we go to Washington in the summer, sometimes they fall down and people rebuild them. I realized some of what I was doing was very much related to that. So this is a piece I made to be a little bit more personal. It's a piece which is kind of like a photo collage of some of the different people from different generations. And a lot of times artists will include personal experience in their own work. They might make it a little bit more vague, and they won't really tell you what's going on. I think I'm much more into, yes, my art is very much about what I'm experiencing. I'm comfortable with that. To a lesser extent, I think my work is making certain social statements, and I'll go into that a bit later. And part of it is definitely kind of a spiritual side that I have, that I definitely think art making relates to larger issues and larger forces kind of at work. So just to kind of show some of this stuff, again, I mentioned that my mom was really into sewing, and these are some of the patterns from the 50s. This is my mom's calendar that she had in her kind of school notebook, picture of my mom. And then, how we're always measuring ourselves up to each other. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. And then these are my sisters. And then this is a picture this is actually not our family farm, from the Great Depression, which I think, still, there's people around who still remember that. And it may seem funny to talk about spiritual presence when I have this artwork with a Cupid doll on the right. But one thing I thought was really fun about working with natural objects is thinking about my own kids. I have 2 girls, is they're both very connected to nature, and in different kinds of ways. And they're also very connected to, especially when they were young, to these little dolls. They didn't necessarily have Cupid dolls. These are pretty old fashioned, but parents know that kids usually attach themselves to an object. And I always found that really interesting. And that object is obviously used to, comfort them and things like that. So I included this one along with, I'm trying to get the appropriate title. This one is called What Goes In. It also has pipes here, and these are hot and cold tabs from our faucet from our house in Washington. All of the colors are pink and green, which the house in Washington that I stay at every year is from the 50s. The starburst patterns is very 50s design. All of these objects I collected like on the beach, the clamshell with the barnacle, the sea urchin. So just trying to get back to the sense of how nature can be really precious and can tell us a lot about a place. This is one of those little toys you get at a restaurant where the kids always want the toy and then they never play with it, which always drives me crazy. But anyways, so again, this one is not necessarily an artwork. I just started putting together natural objects that relate to my use of nature and the colors in nature, all the materials in nature. It's a little hard to see this one, but this is a stone. And I think this one is like a seed pod, and how we pull from nature to kind of create art. A lot of different traditions, religious traditions that are non-Western, really point to objects having kind of almost a spiritual presence. And that's something we don't really believe in. But I know that in the West, definitely, I know I grew up thinking objects had a lot of meaning and importance. And I think especially as a kid, I moved a lot. So what I kept with me, my little mementos, were always really, really important. Whether I put them in special boxes or whether I just carried them around with me. And these may seem funny. These aren't artworks. They're two objects I collected on, this one was on a hike from Frog Creek Pond. And then this one was actually a walk in West Davis, which is pretty close to where I live. And this one is a root ball. And anyone who lives in West Davis knows it was built in 1998, so pretty recently. But there are all these root balls there from plants that have died where they've cut the tops off. And then sometimes the root balls are turned upside down and they look like nests, but they have this beautiful color and shape. This one I added a bit of hardware just to make sure it stood up. So I use things like this in my art. So I'm always trying to take walks and trying to collect things. This one, really reminded me of the fires. It also reminded me just of aging, that jagged edge. So things like this, natural or man-made objects, always end up in my work to talk about larger things. During the pandemic, I saw the Marie Kondo series, which I think is kind of fun to watch, where she was talking about objects that are important to you. They're really much more like companions. And so I've started to look at things kind of differently. I'm not saying I look at everything as it sparks joy, but I love the idea of treasuring things because we are such a disposable society. So these are some of my inspirations. Trees. I really love trees. This is a tree in Seattle, and you could see all these bumps on it. How trees kind of protect each other and they lend energy out. I think it's fascinating, the idea of trees kind of functioning as a network for each other. This is also showing this little bird nest area. This is at Puda Creek. I love to go here, and you can see this kind of natural archway. So trees have history. They also, of course, tell us a lot about climate change. This is my daughter Nora on a walk outside of Winters that had all this burnt stuff. So I collected a lot of stuff from here. But imagine what this tree looked like before the fire, and it's just left there. Subjects. I thought it was be funny. I just found this math homework, age 8. And you can see the top is me trying to work out some subtraction problems, it looks like. But the bottom is me and my sisters dressed in 19th century wear and my mother. I'm still really interested in heritage and history and dress. I've done a whole series on dresses. So I had to laugh when I saw this, and especially I think gender roles. So here's some of my pieces on gender. Some of this has to do with, having two girls and wanting to give them a good example, obviously, for what women can do. I made this piece on the left when my older daughter went to college, and it's called Blue Skies. And I found this photograph with the little girl, and it looks like her mom, and they're talking. And I thought about how, we all try to build this nest for kids, but eventually, of course, they need to leave. And so there's some little images from where she went, a little path. And of course, I love rulers because, again, you're measuring against things. I did it in the shape of a house, of course. And then in the middle is a piece called Call Me, which is an old child's rocker I found at an antique store. I'm not going to show you a detail of this piece, but it's all the things I wanted to tell my daughter about calling me. So sometimes my work is definitely about, messages that I want to say. This I know looks like hair. All of my family, all of my girls had this really blonde hair when they were born. And you can see there's a scissors there. So kind of cutting ties and letting them go, I think is really important. On the right is part of my dress series. This is my slip dress. And here's the real dress in my studio. And you can see there's another dress over here that I did some drawings on. So dress and garments, I think, really relate to, celebration and rituals of passage, how we all, we prepare for, these big occasions in our life, whether it's like a confirmation or a birthday, and those dresses become kind of part and parcel of that event. Another subject I've explored for many years in my own artwork is nests. None of these are real nests. This is a nest that I painted, and I used some feathers to make a little mini nest here. Whoops, go back a bit. And then in the middle, that's a wire nest, and that is actual human hair that I found outside. And then on the right is a piece that I call doll chair nest, which was a found object, this doll chair that was broken and pretty old. And then I made this bundle of fiber with some embroidery thread on it to make my own nest. So I do think nests have a lot of symbolism. I love it that birds use part of course, themselves, their own feathers to insulate the eggs. And I also love it that they're signs kind of their environment. So I do collect nests, not ones in trees, ones that have fallen. And you find all sorts of interesting things from the environment, dryer lint, tickets, old paper, wire. I found, again, human hair. You'll never know what you'll find. This nest on the left is called Gifted Nest. Once I started working with nests a lot, people started giving me real ones. So I think this is a sparrow nest, and it's put in this china cup, which of course talks about family heritage and women. We don't have tea parties anymore, but I love the idea of kind of sharing a meal with the different generations. The spoon is kind of significant because it has sea glass on it, and it's kind of wrapped with this kind of transparent fabric. So again, I was kind of thinking of this piece by Merritt Oppenheim called Object from the 30s, a different point of view, but again, about gender and the different generations. The piece on the right, I found this is a real nest. After a big storm, I found this on the ground, and I just kind of feel saddened by that sometimes, the nests that get kind of left, how much the bird has to go to make that new nest. This piece has mother of pearl buttons, chicken wire. So again, talking about kind of farm life, and then burnt matches. Assemblage, so this is just a fancy way of saying a sculpture with junk in it. On the left is a piece of metal I found with also a bird I found. So sometimes I'll do very little creation of my own, and I just call this bird on a wire. Other things I use are wood that's found. This was from a fence in Central Davis. I have kind of a wire nest here, and these are willow branches that I collected and tied with embroidery thread. So it's called Family Farm. This is actually a postcard from the 50s of wheat threshing in Kansas. So again, you know, this connection between the different generations. On the right, these are two pieces. They're not really meant to go together, but you can see they're very similar. This one's called Not for Baby. These are all things I found on the ground, and you can tell a lot about an area by what you find on the ground. It's something that kind of makes my family anxious. They don't like it that I collect these things, but I try to do it safely. So again, there's a little liquor bottle. There's a little sign that says, you know, not for baby. And there's pots and pan handles and things like that. And then over here, these are all silver objects. So I called it shiny silver things because I love silver. More assemblages. These are mud guards for my husband's bike. I made this into a nest. It's kind of hard to see with wire. So I like to use different materials to make my own nests. And this piece is called No U-Turn. And it's all about kind of how you should go forward, you know, not look back. And then this piece kind of looks like a collage, but it's got some three-dimensional elements. I made this one in Washington. And again, it's the pink and green colors. Some of these are little things for my dad's house, like little tools. These are actually from fireworks. We get to do fireworks every year there for 4th of July, and some wire from a fence there. So it's all about this place. You know, some candy wrappers. This is my mom's recipe. I can't see what it's for, but there's a couple recipes in here. Okay, and last but not least, I have shadow boxes. These are boxes that are for precious objects. Sometimes they're objects from nature. This is kind of halfway Washington, halfway California box. This has some fake grass in it, burnt matches. A lot of these objects, again, they have just special meaning to me because of who gave them to me, how I found them, the particular place. You know, this is a golf ball I found in Davis. Not any particular meaning, but I just love finding toys and things like that that children have used. This one's called Home Decorating. This one's called Yard Treasures. So these are all things from my yard. When we moved into our Davis home, we found this old razor, these hooks, this little bit of hardware. This is a bike bell, the back of it, that I found at the Davis Park. You know, paintbrush we use to paint our house. So how do you capture kind of space and the different generations that have lived before you in a particular location? And I think these are my last shadow boxes. The one on the left is called Remember When. And the pieces that I do in Washington, a lot of times they do have paper in them and things like that because, you know, I'm going through archives as people give me things for my family. You know, I feel like I love these things. This is my mom when she was in 8th grade. I have an 8th grader now. Shells from the beach, you know, different sorts of shells over here. And then at the Pence, we've been talking a lot about racial justice. So I found these tiny hands. I thought that was kind of interesting. All the things that kind of pour out of us. So next to Remember When is Box and Shimo Blue. I don't know if anyone remembers Shimo's exhibit here. I reuse old paint that we're going to toss out from the Pence or my house. He had the most beautiful blue in his exhibit. And so I used it for this box, and every piece in here is junk. It's all black things grouped with the mother of pearl edges and some stenciling. Okay, so that's it. And I know I luckily don't have to facilitate this part. So I am going to turn it over. That's kind of the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you for sharing both your vision for ArtFarm and how you approached that. But again, your very personal art practice as well. Thank you for that. Just a reminder to everyone, go ahead. You can submit questions using the chat feature. And I do have a few to kind of kick us off here. First, Natalie, managing a gallery is definitely a very large job. Being on the back end of this, I do kind of understand that. So how do you balance being a creator and a curator, how do you carve out time to create when so much of your time is devoted to supporting other people in their creative pursuits?
Right. I've had to put some pretty strict limits on my time. It's hard, I think, also having a family and having to tell, your kids who haven't seen you all week, I'm going to my studio. I used to involve them in that and try to get them activated in art making. And I pretty soon was like, I just need a space to myself where I'm not mom and where I don't have to get somebody, a peanut butter sandwich. And so I had to put up limits. I even asked the board for permission to take some time to take classes at Sac City. And that was really good because that was when I started doing sculpture, and that was really important. So I do try to make time for it. I'm not great at that. But again, it helps me balance. I can feel if I haven't been creating for a while, I get kind of irritable.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know, at least for me, when my creative outlets are not reached, I definitely can relate to that. So you spoke a lot, I mean, obviously about place, right? That's kind of our grand theme with ArtFarm within your work, right? Those kind of emotional ties. But also that objecthood is coming into play here, and how objects that either relate to place or to person are really these grand connectors between generations, between, strangers, right? Those objects that you're picking up from the side of the road. Right, those are connections that you're making that the other person doesn't even know that they're a part of at this point, right? So I think that's a kind of beautiful thing. I've always been drawn to this making meaning idea. That Marie Kondo, of course, objects and their importance in your life. Do you feel that having this ability to create meaning through objects as humans, right? Not just you personally, but as a society. Are we, part of me is like, do we do that too much? Do we do that not enough? I can see arguments for both ways, but then again, in your own personal practice, are you finding that outlet is coming out more through your personal creation or through your professional curating, where that meaning making can kind of go all different arrays? So any way you can expand on that.
I think, the art making sometimes informs the curatorial side now, which, I didn't have that before, where I'll see things in a different way because I'm thinking more about process. But especially about the objects, unless you kind of use real objects in your art, you don't get how obsessive you can become about those objects. And it's true, there's a whole spectrum of people who are hoarders, who are obsessive, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it becomes a problem. So in my own art and in my own life, I have rules, and it's like, I can't take something in somebody's yard. I mean, I seriously have to have rules about things like that, because I'm like, that's not my property. But, if you see something meaningful, you're like, oh my God, that's a nest. Maybe it'll inch this way. So I think sometimes we do it too much. I also think, before I came to the Pence, I always worked at places with collections. So, there's this reverence for the object, and sometimes it's ridiculous. You think, how could that be valued at that much? So yeah, I do think we can take it too far. One thing I like about working with contemporary kind of local artists is you don't typically have to worry about that thing of the object being so valuable that I literally can't afford to share it with you, because I can't afford the insurance and I can't afford to move it.
That is definitely a big challenge, especially with collecting institutions, right? Where the collections just grow and grow over the years. And then I think that brings up even more interesting opportunities for discussion where you're talking about intergenerational, right? So an object that has a lot of meaning to us today, right? Our cell phones, right? We can't go anywhere, we can't function without them. But then of course, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever that, crucial object would have been much different.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is funny how we value certain things today that, well, definitely the cell phone, and images have become more disposable and less important. So we have to have different conversations with people, I think, about why something is important. and they're more likely to question us. Like, I don't really get that. And those conversations can be really interesting. But you're right, it's hard because, our valuing system sometimes is so off. And it changes so rapidly that even museums themselves, that collect digital art, they're having to redefine what does it mean to collect a digital piece that I may not be able to see on a computer in a couple years.
Yep, absolutely. I do want to, we have a comment from Roma, who is just saying thank you so much, that you are an excellent communicator and it was a marvelous talk. So I want to share that kudos over to you. And then I have another question coming in. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's been quite fascinating. I live in the UK, and through my art practice, I'm considering how we connect to our landscape and natural world, which for me is a farming landscape. You talk about your relationship to nature, and I'm interested how this relationship has changed in recent years. Do you think the people-nature relationship has changed where you live?
I think COVID has changed a lot, and I notice a lot more people outside that I never saw walking pre-COVID. And I've always either done running or walking as I get older. And I find that those are essential. And we know that now, all the studies about mental health, you need to get outside and you need to get moving. So for me, connecting with the natural landscape is so important. It could be a park, it could be Cache Creek, but I think it quiets all that noise, that we normally have from our busy lives. So I do think it's changed because of COVID, but I also think obviously this wonderful woman is from the UK, depending on your connection to the city, and moving to someplace like Davis has been much quieter for me. And I think if I had stayed in Sacramento or Oakland where I lived before, I wouldn't have this connection to nature. It's harder to find that. To go out and, drive 2 hours to have to go take a hike. So I think especially seeing my kids' enjoyment of nature and, going to thousands of parks, I definitely have started to think about nature in a different sort of way in my life.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
So with that, let's see.
Oh, thank you, Janice. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We are reaching our time limit here. Oops, sorry. Our time limit here at 1 o'clock. I do want to give you opportunities to follow up and reach out. Natalie is available at the Pence Gallery in Davis. Feel free to come on by during their open hours. I hear she's there quite a bit. And her phone number is also available on the screen. To follow up with YoloArts and ArtFarm and anything else going on, please visit YoloArts.org. If you have an email or a question you'd like to follow up, you can send us an email at ya@YoloArts.org. And of course, follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram at YoloArtsCA. I am seeing a question coming in asking if this talk will be available later. Yes, definitely. So it does take me a day or two to edit the content and get it up on our YouTube page, but it should be available on the YoloArts.org website and our YouTube page on Monday. I will definitely have it up by Monday for everyone. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you again, Natalie. And I hope to see everyone on Saturday at ArtFarm. I'll be at the check-in table, so be sure to say hi.
Bye, everyone.